Testing 1, testing 2. Mic check 1, mic check 2. Testing. Testing 1, testing 2. Mic check 1, mic check 2. Yeah, good?
Morning, everyone. Welcome to Trenton on a cold, chilly Friday morning. Appreciate everybody coming. My name is Paul Baldoff. I'm Assistant Commissioner for Air Quality, Energy, and Sustainability. And I'm only going to be up here for a few minutes, but I'd like to give you like a brief overview of not just why we're here today, but the entire New Jersey Pact, protecting against climate threats, and just kind of put everything into context, give you some time frames of what we're going to be doing over the next, well, really 2 years, and what we'll be focusing on. One page. So, New Jersey Pact. There's, on the mitigation side, there's 3 big pieces I'm going to talk about. The first is the Global Warming Response Act. We are working on the Global Warming Response Act with expectation of having the document finalized the end of June. And what that is a document that looks at different pathways for us to get to 80% reduction in our 2006 level of greenhouse gases by 2050. As far as how we're handling that, we had done a report way back on the Global Warming Response Act. It was not anywhere near as detailed as what you're going to see in the 2050 report. So this really is a first-time endeavor for us. There's going to be multiple chapters in the report that focus on such things as transportation, highly warming gases, sequestration, things like that, short-lived climate pollutants. And we hope to have a document for a draft document out on the street end of April, probably about a 30-day comment period, and then, like I said, a final document issued the end of June. Expectations for the document is it's going to have pathways to get to 2050. It'll have recommendations for potential policy changes, regulatory changes, statutory changes, if that's applicable, things in those areas. So we're excited that we're close to being done with that and moving forward. We had timed it in such a way so it complemented the Energy Master Plan. As most of you already know, the Energy Master Plan came out in January, and the 2050 report feeds off of that. So a lot of the things that were done in the Energy Master Plan do not have to be repeated in the 2050 report. There are sections of the 2050 report that weren't addressed in the Energy Master Plan, so certainly that has to be done. But for instance, a lot of the transportation discussions that you saw in the Energy Master Plan will be followed up in the 2050 report and taken forward. So all the good work that BPU did on the Energy Master Plan, that's the first step, and then the 2050 report will follow up. The second piece, and why we're here today, is Greenhouse Gas Emissions and Monitoring Reporting and Monitoring Rule. What that is, as most of you know, we've been reporting the greenhouse gas inventory for many years. Not surprisingly, a lot of that information is cobbled from a bunch of different sources. Not all of the things we're reporting are reported to us. We're doing estimations based upon population, based upon activities, based upon reporting to the federal government. So what we're trying to do through this rule that we'll discuss today is get everything reported to us that we need reported to be very confident on what our inventory actually is. Because at the end of the day, when we're putting large amounts of dollars and focus on certain sectors and certain areas, we need to be sure that A, we know what that inventory is, and B, be able to track it going forward so we can see year to year where we are in terms of reaching our 2050 goals. A little bit of a change too with the inventory reporting. Over the years, we didn't have specific schedules to do the inventory report. We've changed that. It's going to be an annual report instead of, there were times, like for instance, the report that's there now picks up the last 3 years up to 2018, but we're going to do it annually so everybody's on the same page as far as where we are going forward and tracking our progress. The timing on, and we'll get into more detail later on, the timing on this rulemaking is that we'd like to have a proposal out in the street by the end of the year, and then a final rule in place 6 months after that. I'm confident that we'll have the proposal out hopefully earlier than the end of this year, and and probably exceed what the executive order states. And stepping back, Executive Order 100 is where everything is coming from with New Jersey Pact. The last piece in the mitigation side is CO2 emissions and regulating CO2 emissions. For those of you who want to come to Trenton again, Tuesday morning or all day Tuesday, we'll be doing the same stakeholdering, except the focus will be CO2 emissions. The timing there is a little different. We're looking for a proposal by January. Hopefully it's a little earlier, and then adoption a year after that. The CO2 emissions, the sector, it's not necessarily just electric generating units. There are residential, industrial, and commercial contributors to the CO2 emission world. So part of the stakeholdering on Tuesday will be a discussion whether it's appropriate to include them. If you do include them, at what level do you include them, and things like that. So the CO2 emission discussion will be Tuesday in this room. I think it's 8:30, might start earlier instead of 9. But that's all day. I expect that discussion to go longer than today's will. The other pieces in Executive Order 100 are on the land use side and deal with resilience. I do not know the number of stakeholder meetings set up there, but I know they start the first week of March. I believe there's 3 or 4 scheduled. If you take a look on our website on the New Jersey Pact, it'll explain and give you the schedule there. But that's on the resilience side, and they also do have a similar schedule for proposal and adoption of regulations. And the last piece there, after Executive Order 100 was signed, Commissioner McCabe issued an administrative order that basically directs our assistant commissioners and staff to follow through with everything that's in Executive Order 100. This is the big step for the department in terms of the suite of regulations is obviously a huge undertaking. We understand the necessity of getting things done quickly. We're moving at light speed for the department, which many people will say is going backwards at times, but we are moving very quickly. We appreciate all the support and the stakeholdering. The rules some are more complex than others. What we'll talk about today is strictly just a reporting rule and capturing what's out there and make sure we're focused and we have an accurate account of the inventory. On Tuesday, discussion's a little more complicated in terms of CO2 emissions and how do you regulate and what options are out there. And certainly in the 2050 report, you're talking from everything, all the different pathways. There's a lot of things, a lot of sectors involved and a lot of different opinions. So we look forward to the interaction, hearing your comments. We're using, a last piece I just want to emphasize, we're using the stakeholdering. Really, it's been done since the beginning of administration too. So for those of you who, I know we have some members of the Clean Air Council here. They focused on Hfcs last year. We're using that stakeholdering as to inform the 2050 report. The numerous stakeholdering pieces done at Energy Master Plan where it's applicable, we're using that to inform this. So it's really, even though today might be the first stakeholdering for this particular piece, we're using the information we've gotten since the beginning of administration and what we've heard, and obviously lessons learned from over the years. That's my summary of how we got here. I'm going to step back and let staff walk you through each piece of the rule. But first, we're going to have Tanya Osnowicz walk us through some ground rules. She's going to be our facilitator today, and thank you very much. Tanya.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanya Osnowicz. I work in our Office of Communications, and I'm the facilitator. Welcome, everybody, to all of our stakeholders. I'd like to welcome NJTV, who's here today recording the meeting, and also some of you know this is one of our first times for Skyping this meeting, and so I want to welcome the viewers, listeners who are using that system, and it's something that I wanted you to be aware of, that all of the remarks today will be recorded through Skype. Couple of housekeeping things. If you need to take a call today, if you could just make sure your phones are silent, you can exit. You need to exit the room through those 2 back doors. When you If you could go to the lobby for your call, that would be great, because there's workspaces on this wing. And then when you come back into the room, if you could come in through the side room exactly as you checked in this morning, that's how the pattern is for flow. Restrooms, if you need to use the facilities, are out those doors and make a left. I feel like this is the Vanna White thing. So go out the doors, make a left for that, and then come back in. We do have a robust agenda. We plan to end at noon, and we have a great crowd. So we have a lot to cover. We will not be taking a break mid-morning, so please exit as you need to. Part of my role is to keep the group on task in terms of adhering to the agenda. I know if you're here to share on and to talk about very specific things, my job is to make sure you have time to do so. So we have a schedule planned where you will have various openings of time for people to provide questions, comments, feedback, concerns. We also will have time at the end of the meeting for open discussion. So we're looking for focused discussion on monitoring and reporting initially, and then we'll have time at the end of the session if there's other things that you need to cover, or if we didn't have time to cover something specific. Each topic is going to be introduced by staff. After their remarks are completed, we'll open it up for questions, just to make sure we look for clarity. Did what was just shared to you right now make sense? Does anyone have comments or concerns about what was just shared? We'll also be asking you questions, and we need your feedback on certain things. I'm going to be selecting people by raised hands. Please introduce yourself by name and who you are here today representing. And in this meeting, because of Skype, you'll see that we have portable mics scattered around the room. And I hate to have to ask everyone to do this, but it's like a group cooperation activity. Pass the mic to the person who's going to be speaking. We don't have one for everybody, but we'll just need you to help out with that. I'm told that the power lasts longer if they stay on green, so we're going to leave the mics on. So just be mindful of that if you have a sidebar conversation. You'll have about a minute to share. I'll give you a heads up when your time is nearing the end. My job is to make sure we have good diversity in our sharing, so please make sure that you cover what you need to in a minute. If we need to wrap up a discussion and there's still hands raised, write down your comment, and the slides are numbered, and that's what we'll come back to at the end of the session, just to make sure. So we do want you to let go of everything you need to before you leave today, but I just want to be mindful of the time. Brevity is key for all of our remarks today, including department staff as well as our guests. Our goal for today is to have the department listen to everybody's feedback and input on the Response Act and greenhouse gas reporting. We do expect concerns and problems to be identified, and we're also hoping and expecting solutions to be suggested. Today's agenda does not allow time for debates, sidebar discussions, long stories, personal grievances, and I'll need to halt them if they occur. We have staff who will be taking notes today on your feedback and comment, and that's for internal use, and we do encourage you to take your own notes. You should have picked up an agenda and a copy of the statute when you came in. That was in the outside lobby, so everybody should have those copies. And just your participation, as already been mentioned, is extremely valuable. Thank you for being here today. Does anybody have any questions just on what I covered? Yes, sir. Yes, they'll be circulated after the meeting? Is that slides? Okay, the slides will be posted. Good question. Thanks, Jeff. Okay.
Thank you, Tana. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out here today. My name is Bob Kettig. I'm the blank screen. There we go. Hi. I am Bob Kettig. I'm the Assistant Director for Climate Change, Clean Energy, and Sustainability. So what I'm going to do is give you an overview of what we hope to accomplish today and introduce you to the extended team here at DEP that's going to be working on this rule development. So first of all, Kai Azrael will be leading the more detailed presentation on what is going to go into this rule. Kai is going to be the rule manager. Joe Carpenter is going to be the lead rule writer, although we'll be pulling from a number of programs to write that rule. The economist handling this rule from the department is Diane Crilly. And we have as this rule touches a number of programs and offices within the DEP, we have an extended group of advisors that's not really limited to this group, but that consists of Paul Orlando, Jung Kim, Ken Ratzman, Christine Schell, Peg Hanna, and myself. Technical staff working on this rule. It's Mike Monkbody, Bennett Yolarte, Matt Rivas, Kristen Brennan, Ginger Case, Helene Barr, Chris Barry, and Jeff Cantor. So for this rule today, we are going to be hearing comment and taking notes, but we will also be accepting a written summary of your comments. You can email them to the box we have set up, address there, Greenhouse Gas Monitoring Reporting Rule, and we'll be taking those through March 6th. So just to kind of get the big picture of what brings us here and what we are looking to accomplish, we are looking to enhance and improve the GHG reporting information that we get that is the basis for doing our greenhouse gas inventory. The greenhouse gas inventory is the basis that we're using to achieve the mandated reductions from Governor's executive order and from the Global Warming Response Act. So just a quick refresher, the Global Warming Response Act mandates that New Jersey reach economy-wide reductions of 80% from 2006 baseline levels. And this is our last GHG inventory right here. So as Paul had mentioned, this came out in 2019, but we're using 2018 data. As Paul did mention, and consistent with amendments of the Global Warming Response Act, we will now be doing this inventory on an annual basis. So doing the inventory on an annual basis is going to allow us to track the progress moving forward over the next 5, 10, all the way up to 2050 of where are we going and what are we accomplishing as a result of the greenhouse gas reduction programs that we're installing. So the data that we get from this comes from a variety of sources. Some of it is very detailed and directly reported to the state. Some is directly reported to the Energy Information Association and the federal government. Some is directly reported to the EPA. Some is a best case estimate based on population or length of pipe, et cetera, et cetera. So we're always looking to enhance the reporting. We made a transition last year in doing the transportation sector. It was more accurate for New Jersey to use vehicle miles traveled as opposed to retail sales. So when we do that, we go back and readjust the baseline. So we are looking to improve this moving forward and having us give us more accurate numbers as we track our progress towards greenhouse gas reduction. So what we hope to do today, Kai is going to go over some of the more details that are mandates in the Act that would be included in the rule. And what we have queued up some high-level questions, and we really hope to get feedback today for you to inform us for where we should be targeting our efforts to require either refined additional reporting, identify where maybe reporting is done at a very detailed level, and avoid a duplicative process and have that same reporting reported directly to us. So what I'll do now is I'm going to hand it off to Kai, and he's going to walk you through the details of what's going to be in the rule.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much for coming out here today. We really appreciate the time that you're taking to give us your feedback. As we develop this rule, we're going to be looking at today's comments to help shape and mold what we're going to be doing. So we're looking forward to having some really good feedback from the audience today. And for those people that might be viewing this online, please remember that you can send your comments via email. You can't interact with this audience today, but you can send the email with your comments, your feedback to the email, and we'll be showing that email address again later today. Okay, so basically the legislature came up and identified certain areas where and directed the department to come up with regulations for the monitoring and reporting of greenhouse gas emissions. They chose specifically these 4 sectors for reporting to happen in. One is the manufacturers and distributors of fossil fuels will have to report. The legislation is requiring that. Electric generating units in the state and out of the state for in-state use, they're supposed to give us information as well. Now, the out-of-state electric generating use, and I'll get into that separately, they are not going to be reporting to us. That's going to be done through a calculation. Gas public utilities have to report according to this rule. And then a 4th category, which is more of a catch-all, and that's for any significant emitters of short-lived climate pollutants. And those are as determined by the department. So we're going to get into each one of those. And after each section, you'll have an opportunity to give us some feedback. The first one I want to cover is the fossil fuels one. So basically, we're going to be requiring greenhouse gas emissions reporting from manufacturers and distributors of fossil fuels. However, the way we're going to collect that information isn't necessarily a direct emission of greenhouse gas from those facilities. Currently, those fossil fuel providers report information to the federal government. So a lot of that information that they're reporting doesn't come directly to the state of New Jersey. Because of that, we get information on a delayed basis. Sometimes we don't get complete information. We would like to make sure that we mirror some of the federal requirements, but make it state-specific. We're going to require similar reporting that goes out to the feds to come to the state of New Jersey. And that direct reporting will give us a better opportunity to put the greenhouse gas emissions inventory out in a timely manner. So basically, we're going to be looking at those federal reporting requirements, have them submitted directly to the department, and where are they going to be coming from? They're going to be coming from oil refineries, oil storage facilities, natural gas pipelines, fuel, wholesale, and retail distributors. This is identified in the regulation. Now, it's not limited to that, but this is what is directly identified. So the kind of information that we're going to be asking in these forms for reporting is basically fuel type. So that would be, you know, if it's diesel or kerosene or gasoline or any other distillate of petroleum. In addition to the fuel type, we're going to be asking for fuel use. So how is that fuel being used? Whether it's done for commercial or industrial purposes, residential use, for transportation. This would also include off-road use of that fuel. Now, with that kind of information, volume, type, use, the department will be able to utilize that information to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions from various sectors using these fossil fuels. We're confident that the greenhouse gas emissions from this is well known and that we can calculate it to a high level of certainty. Just to give an example of what the federal forms that are in existence that this industry currently reports on are these two. There are additional forms out there, just showing these as an example. They would show things like fuel use, fuel type, volumes. And we would create a single form for the state of New Jersey that would capture this kind of information. So this brings us to our first section where we're looking for some feedback. Now I want you to notice with these slides, There's a slide number in the lower right-hand corner. It's a little small, but this is slide 15. There are letters to indicate the question that we're kind of posing out there. So if you want to comment, and those people that are online that want to submit a comment, they can say slide 15, question B, this is my comment. All right, so first of all, we want to know, are there additional obstacles, costs associated with reporting fossil fuel directly to the state of New Jersey, to the department? And B, are there any concerns in the proceeding, what I just went over, described for this sector? What kind of concerns do we have for the industry? Are there better ways to collect this greenhouse gas information for monitoring and reporting from fossil fuel manufacturing and distribution, where the department should consider those better ways of handling, collecting greenhouse gas emissions from this sector? So I'm going to open it up. Yes. Yeah, please speak into the microphone because that's...
Planning organization for the 9 counties of Greater Philadelphia, including 4 counties in New Jersey: Camden, Gloucester, Burlington, and Mercer. We've been doing greenhouse gas inventories since 2005, working closely with the US EPA in deciding our protocol for our region. Prior to that, I worked for the Global Reporting Initiative, which established essentially reporting requirements for businesses globally as the global standard for reporting. I have a couple questions about the sort of, I guess, making sure you've thought about a couple issues. One is there are a lot of, from this sector, there are a lot of emissions associated with the refining of fuels that are not related to the combustion of the fuels in use for transportation or heating or whatever else. And also there's potentially leakages, particularly of methane in the processing of that through this system. Are you primarily looking at, so I guess the one question is talking a little bit about gaseous fuels, and then also the way we do, this is largely related to the transportation sector. We base all of our work on VMT, vehicle miles traveled within our region, and use, based on that, so we don't end up with issues of exporting or importing fuels. I mean, it would be possible that New Jersey cars could use no fuel refined in New Jersey if New Jersey didn't have any refining processes in the state. A lot of states use fuel that, a lot of gasoline probably that's refined in New Jersey. So how are you handling sort of the border issues on that? And also, if I'm refining, pardon?
Let's go one at a time.
Okay.
Okay, so
Okay. Yeah, so to address the first thing that you mentioned, where manufacturers of fuels may be emitting gases as part of their process, right? So yes, that's going to actually be covered in the later part of the of our inventory here, because that's going to be under significant other gases, the short-lived climate pollutants that we would be trying to capture there, okay? But to give you the brief answer, we're looking at capturing that type of emission from regulated facilities that put out a certain amount to be reported on an emission statement, all right? So which currently they may be regulated as a pollutant, okay, but they're not necessarily counted in emission statements. So we're going to make some changes to accommodate for those processes from an industrial perspective that would be contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. Now, for the issue of vehicle miles traveled versus fuel usage, we are moving toward a process by which we are going to use a better model for emissions from transportation. So a lot of that information will be coming from our Bureau of Mobile Sources, where we'll be using a modeling program for most of those transportation emissions.
So I guess the question then is, if someone is refining oil for gasoline and is selling that gasoline throughout the nation, or at least outside of New Jersey, in addition to New Jersey, and you're also having an effort at calculating emissions from gasoline based on VMT, that seems like you're doing the same calculation two different ways, and so.
No, yes.
Just to answer the issue, I think the question is, how are we capturing the emissions from refining the petroleum products as opposed to using them in transportation?
Well, and also, for those used in transportation, you said you were going to take the numbers reported on usage and convert them to greenhouse gas emissions, but you also noted you're using a VMT method as well, and those seem like those are two methods to calculate the same emissions. So I just, you know.
So for the greenhouse gas inventory, we transitioned to using the MOVES model based on VMT. And so that's for the transportation. For the actual emissions associated with refining the products, the emissions from the two refineries in New Jersey are captured in the industrial sector.
So I understand that. Okay.
So that's how it's separated.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir. If you could just remember to introduce yourself.
Eric DeGesero, Fuel Merchants Association of New Jersey. How do you deal with not double or triple counting the same gallon, if you will? So it's refined at the refinery by one entity. It is then sold to another entity above the terminal rack where the 782 form that you have up there is complied with. And then there is the retail aspect. So how do you make sure you're only capturing that gallon once as opposed to 3 or 4 times, depending on how many different reporting entities you have?
Okay, I understand the question. The emissions associated with the product is not associated with the refinery. It's the emissions from the refinery that are emitted as a result of refining the product are the refinery emissions, and they would be incorporated in our reporting rule. We would have direct reporting of them to the state, and actually that's also reported to EPA. The emissions associated with the gasoline, if you will, that is refined, that's not attributed to the refinery. That's attributed to the end use and transportation in the VMT. So it's not a double counting. The petroleum that the refinery makes and puts in a truck or puts in a barge, that has a carbon content and emissions associated with it. But that's not attributed to the refinery. It's the direct emissions at the refinery, both from the point sources and the area sources that are the industrial emissions.
And then, so then there's one for the refining, and then the 782. So the refinery will report that when they manufacture that, and then when it goes into the distribution system, it will then be counted, and that's the refinery manufacturing. It is counted on the industrial side as manufacturing, and then when it's distributed through the wholesale system, and you're using the 782 form, it will be captured in the retail sector, if you will, by those filers. Is that?
Yes, that's accurate. And we did use retail sales as the basis for assessing the transportation emissions up until last year. That's when we transitioned. We're not using retail sales. We're using the vehicle miles traveled. We just, the information that we had indicated that better reflected the emissions in New Jersey.
Okay.
Okay, we have Jeff in the corner, and then we'll be going up to that corner with Ray.
Jeff Fiddle, Sierra Club. A couple of questions. When you're looking at the VMTs and the mobile sources, are you looking at the complete life cycle, meaning from, fracking out in the Bakken crude in North Dakota to transshipping it to New Jersey and then the refining part? And then the second part, are we also looking at, when we're looking at VMTs, out-of-state through traffic in New Jersey?
No, thank you. So no, there's not a life cycle component. It's the greenhouse gas inventory is the inventory from New Jersey.
And then the second question is that for C on monitoring and collecting, when I look at the EPA data, they themselves say a lot of it's self-reporting and a lot of it there's at least a 5% margin of error. And so you really need to do some independent audits or separate monitoring to be able to pick it up. Also, it doesn't deal with fugitive emissions, which happens in the industrial sector and the electrical sector as well. You know, I remember years ago when DEP did an audit of a facility, it turned out their fugitive emissions were 4 times what their permitted emissions were. So is that going to be adjusted in here as well?
Yeah, and that's really part of going through this process. We want to understand where there are any potential voids and look for opportunities to improve what we do in the inventory. So we would definitely take that into consideration.
Hi, Ray Cantor, New Jersey Business and Industry Association. My question is similar to the one before about making sure that you're not, double counting and how the calculations are done. So what I heard you say was that from a manufacturer perspective, from a refinery perspective, you're only capturing those emissions that are in the manufacturing process, and then all the product itself is going to be accounted for somewhere else. That's correct.
Yes, that's how the inventory is done. The industrial emissions associated with what's emitted at the facility.
Then I'm not sure, again, you had mentioned pipelines as well as being counted. Other than, again, maybe methane, emissions from that, the pipeline itself doesn't emit, other than that leakage, but that product is used somewhere else, either in an establishment, in a generating facility, et cetera. So, what are you looking for from emissions perspective from pipelines? And just to follow up on that as well, a lot of fuel in pipelines also are leaving the state. So I'm assuming, we're only counting what's being emitted in New Jersey, not what's going in and out of the state. How are you accounting to make sure that you're not counting out of the state, emissions in New Jersey?
So the estimation for pipeline emissions, which would be primarily leaks, is based on material of the pipe and linear feet. And we understand that is an estimation, and we understand that is an opportunity where we would like to understand where those emission drivers are, and if there is opportunities to get better data on that, we would like to do that.
Who else has comments or questions or answers to these three? Just keep your hands up so I see you. Also back here too. Okay, right. I'll take your next.
It's Toby Hanna from ERM, and it's following on with this double counting or border issues again, that I heard vehicle miles traveled will be the primary metric used for calculating vehicle emissions. Why do we need retail sales of gasoline then if we're using VMT to predict emissions?
The retail sales of gasoline that's currently reported to the federal government. I guess the conversation is that mandated specifically in the rule that the state get that information? If there is duplicative information that is not going to enhance the inventory, we want that comment, because we absolutely want to avoid that happening and reconcile how does that fit into the mandated requirements in the Act. But I mean, there's no point in us getting redundant information if it's not going to enhance the inventory.
Okay, and just a couple more that go along with that, but I think EPA struggled with some of this, and when they were developing their Part 98 rules, and they did collect all of the information, the fuel supplier information and the end user information, and I think, I've never really drilled through their data, but they found a way to subtract off fuel that's going to other people that are reporting the combustion of that fuel. So away from vehicles, if we're talking about industrial uses of fuels, you get the fuel supplier to give you the fuel data and some information about where it went, but probably not enough detail to get it down to the facility level. Then you have the users of that fuel reporting their direct emissions. You would want to subtract that out from the fuel that was reported by the fuel supplier to be able to not double count. And that's that's probably a pretty difficult math, I think, at the state level. So we'd be looking at, making sure that we're collecting the right information at the right levels and not double counting on top of it. Then the last point is if you're looking at fuel sales, I think Ray mentioned this too, but it's how do you know that that's burned in New Jersey? How do you know that that results in emissions that's in New Jersey? Whether it's in vehicles or industrial facilities or apartment buildings or wherever is, again, challenges that other collectors of data have done, but when you do it nationally, it's a little easier to gross it up than it is to try and break it down to the individual state boundaries that are much, much smaller.
Any comments? Okay, I have a gentleman back here, Ray, and then we'll come to you.
Ray Nichols. I'm representing Unitarian Universalist Faith Action of New Jersey. We are a religious organization, and like many faith organizations in the state, we're concerned about the ethics of what is being done here and the information that is being collected. An old motto is trust but verify. And so we are most interested in seeing that the data is verified. So if it's coming out of a smokestack, that there be continuous recording on the smokestack that is transmitted directly electronically to the state. With respect to vehicle miles traveled, I don't know how you collect that data when there's millions of vehicles in the state of New Jersey. It used to be that when automobiles were inspected annually, biannually, they collected data on the emissions of each vehicle. I understand that's no longer being done. I would recommend that that be reinstituted, which would give you better information in terms of the combustion of automotive fuels and truck fuels than estimating based upon an estimate of how many vehicle miles are traveled. Thank you.
Ken Valsky, Empower, New Jersey. Does your model have a look-ahead feature? So specifically, if you know that there are projects that are under construction in a given year that are going to emit greenhouse gases in the future, are you making any effort to capture an estimate of what those would be and at least build them into your expectations so that you're not surprised in the future?
For the inventory, no, it's an assessment of what is emitted in that year.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Yasmin Passar. I work for a company, Insight Civil Engineering, and I'm here to represent the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. I have a question here for Kai regarding black carbon and diesel emissions. Is there anything here that the DEP is doing moving forward to cover these issues?
Thank you for that question. We will be covering black carbon. However, it will be when we cover the significant other short-lived climate pollutants, and that is at the end. I hope you can stick around for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll cover it then.
Okay. And will you also be covering then aviation, like jet stream, or anything of that nature, having to do with tailpipe emissions?
As far as aviation goes, that would be a calculation based on the fuel usage that would be collecting from the fossil fuel manufacturers and distributors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go back to Ray, and then we'll come back to you. Any other first-time shares?
Again, on vehicle miles traveled, I assume there is a way to subtract out EVs, which, while vehicle miles traveled, obviously do not have emissions. So, you're accounting for that, or you will be accounting for that.
We won't be calculating for it.
So there's a way to pull them out.
Yeah, right. The modeling that's used with VMT identifies specific vehicle types, including electric vehicles. So electric vehicles would not be included in that.
And again, you started off this conversation on reporting by saying you were going to have similar reporting to the federal requirements. Why similar? What are you changing and why?
So, well, where there are specific components of the act that require the rule mandate that there's direct reporting to the state, we're trying to reconcile that if that is reported to the federal government and we can essentially get it from the federal government, the question in rule writing, is that still going to be a requirement that it's reported to the state? And if that's the requirement that's in the act, it has to be reported to the state. We understand that you would be reporting to two separate entities, but we want to avoid any unnecessary burden in doing that and have the similar report or the identical report in a state form sent to us.
Yeah, Rob Graff again. Just to let you know how we do aviation emissions in the DVRPC region, because airplanes tend to overfuel in airports where fuel prices are low and underfuel in airports where fuel prices are high, we thought it was important to sort of do almost a VMT type air miles traveled. So what we did was we got every flight in and out of Philadelphia International Airport and took half of its distance of each flight and allocated it to our region, allowing the other half to be allocated to wherever the destination was, and then used essentially the fuel economy of commercial jets to calculate that. So this might be something you might consider. The other challenge which we had, and you will certainly have, is that Newark Airport in particular serves a lot of people outside of New Jersey with their air travel needs, so it's just going to make it a complication. So,
Thank you for that comment.
Yeah, good comments. We still have a little time left on these questions. I'll come back to you, Jeff. We have someone over there for because I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak who desires to.
David Pringle, I'm representing Clean Water Action. Will you be accounting for, in electric general units and refineries, short-lived climate emissions like black carbon, especially, and if so, how?
Okay. Again, we will cover short-lived climate pollutants toward the end of the presentation. Those emissions are going to be somewhat independent of any of these other type of emissions. So,
so what a smokestack emits black carbon, so how are you accounting for that?
Understood.
I mean, whether it be from a utility, from a coal plant, a gas plant, or a refinery.
Okay. Well, as far as black carbon emissions go, most of those emissions in our research come from diesel emissions. Okay. So that would be the area that we'd be focused on. If there's information that there are other significant sources of black carbon emissions from other industries in New Jersey, then, I'll be happy to hear those comments.
Just, Dave, our plan is for the next year's inventory to include a black carbon section in that starts to inventory black carbon. We're doing it. It would be it is the one that we're going to be completing this year, so it'd be 2019 data.
So Jeff Tittle, I wanted to.
Our schedule to have that out is the end of the summer, fall.
So one of the things that I know California and other states are doing to look at greenhouse gases and the localized as well as regional impacts is that they set up their own network of air monitoring stations as a way to pick up, leakage, fugitive emissions, and, other things that aren't getting reported. Is New Jersey looking to expand its network so that we could actually do a better job of monitoring greenhouse gases around the state and look for their, major sources? Because a lot of that stuff's not going to get picked up under the models you have.
Jeff, at this point, the ambient air quality monitoring network has some capabilities for looking at speciation of particulate. We'll continue to do that for the particulate, which includes things like elemental carbon, black carbon. But in terms of monitoring for methane, at this point, we don't have any plans to do methane monitoring. With regard to CO2 being a global pollutant is measured many locations. It does not vary greatly across New Jersey, so we tend to use those scientific and academic resources to determine CO2. So really the only pollutant which has a health-based pollutant, which is our primary concern for the ambient monitoring network, is the particulate and particulate speciation.
Mike Egginton, New Jersey State Chamber of Commerce, and just to segue into the aviation question, and in light of full disclosure, I serve on the Clean Air Council, and our public hearing is on intermodal. Are we looking beyond the scope of, and I know the challenges with our airports in Newark and Philly, are we looking at general aviation airports like Teterboro and Mercer, Morristown? Are we looking at the rail systems throughout the state and the ports and such? And I'm asking you in the context of, because of our public hearing coming up in April, just wanted to know where does the scope, go with this?
So as far as commercial aviation, we want to take input on that because there's largely estimates that are done that are based on the number of flights above a certain altitude, and we recognize that that's one of the parts of the inventory we really have just an estimate. So if there's an ability to enhance that and get a more accurate representation, that's one of the asks we have out here today. Ships at a port that are I believe that they're handled the same way as far as a ship, going around, a tanker ship going around the world. As far as the in-state use of like diesel for rail, that we would get that reported in a retail sale.
Doug O'Malley, Environment New Jersey. So I just two questions regarding methane and leakage, and to piggyback a little bit on Jeff's comment on the importance of having additional monitoring. What are the strategies, and obviously this question has been asked before, but what are the strategies that the department is considering to be able to more fully capture leakage, and are there other models that you're looking at? So let's just leave it there. And
would it be okay if we just hold off on that question? Because we are going to talk about public gas utilities and methane.
Okay, that's fine then.
Okay, I think what we're going to do is go on to the next topic on the agenda then. Thanks, that was all great input, and we'll continue on to the next section.
All right. So for electric generating units, the legislature is requiring monitoring and reporting from greenhouse gas emissions of any entity generating electricity for end use in the state. So currently, greenhouse gas emissions are being reported through emission statements from electric generating units. And out-of-state greenhouse gas emissions are calculated by the department. So this information is already being captured, already being inputted into our emissions inventory, and we don't expect any change for this industrial sector. So the department's requiring monitoring and reporting of emissions from these electric generating facilities. In-state sources are permitted as major facilities and report greenhouse gas emissions through their emission statements. And again, we are not looking to have any changes for this sector. Sure.
Yes. Ken Dalsky. So what about in-state producers of electricity,
Yes.
like Seawar and Seven, that are selling power out of state, but are producing greenhouse gases in the state?
So all of the emissions that occur in New Jersey are captured in our inventory. So in the case where they have dispatch agreements with, in this case, New York ISO, where they send power to New York, the emissions are counted in our inventory, regardless of whether the electricity is consumed in PJM or in New York ISO.
Okay, I thought it was only for, you're only counting in-state.
Yeah, the emissions are in-state.
In-state generation. So anything that generates CO2 emissions or emissions associated with electric generation in New Jersey, irrespective of where that electricity is used, is counted for.
Okay, we're going over to Ray.
Again, Ray Cantor, NJBIA. I know, again, it's an existing policy, but why are we capturing emissions from out-of-state generation? Are they captured by the state of origin?
So if New Jersey's, what it comes down to is if New Jersey's retail sales exceed the in-state generation, the inventory, so if essentially if we buy more electricity in New Jersey than is generated in New Jersey, the assumption is that electricity is supplied from out-of-state sources elsewhere in our regional transmission operator, PJM. So since the consumption of electricity is driving the emissions, the inventory has always calculated that as an adder. Essentially, the imported generation, we're responsible for those emissions.
I understand that, but I disagree that we're responsible for that. You know, we're responsible for facilities in New Jersey. And again, you know, so let's take your question before. If we're generating electricity in New Jersey and sending it into New York, I'm assuming if New York was doing the same thing, they would be calculating your imports as generation, and we're calculating it here as being generated. I don't know why we're not putting a wall around us. Since we can only control what is being generated and permitted in New Jersey, we can't control what's coming in from out. We don't capture carbon sequestration from other states. You know, we should be it's a New Jersey greenhouse gas inventory.
Thank you for your comments. We're going to go with Jeff and then with you, sir.
I wanted to comment on Ray. Well, actually, we do. Our trees pick up a lot of CO2 from Pennsylvania, but so we do actually pick up out of state. But the question I have on, again, looking at the greenhouse gas inventory, are we looking at the pipeline, again, are we going to look at life cycle, the leakage from pipelines and venting for methane from compressor stations going to these facilities, the releases from fracking out in Pennsylvania and other places? And so are we just going to be narrowly looking just at the stack emissions? And again, there's also fugitive emissions, especially when you deal with coal and some of the other ones.
So, Jeff, to the extent that those fugitive emissions occur in New Jersey, if the compressor station's in New Jersey, or certainly if the pipes are leaking in New Jersey, they're counted. As far as, you know, an out-of-state wellhead, no, we don't incorporate that component of the life cycle.
And I have a question on size. So you're going to capture things even under 25 megawatts, because a lot of that stuff kind of slips through cracks and some of the peakers too.
Yeah, I don't believe we have any utility units below 25 megawatts in New Jersey anymore.
You do. They're called incinerators. And
yeah, well, they are captured in the industrial emissions. So yes, the emissions from the resource recovery facilities are captured.
Okay, thank you.
So this is Rob Graff again. The way to respond to your question about, we calculate electricity emissions for our region, which I believe is the same methodology that NJTPA, our counterpart in North Jersey, and SJTPO, our counterpart in South Jersey, does, by using consumption of electricity regardless of where it's produced. And the reason we do that is that the policies that affect electricity use and affect emissions associated with electricity are generally based on the consumption of electricity. There are certain policies based on the production of electricity, like the RGGI policies, but the policies to encourage energy efficiency and energy conservation are based on the use of electricity, not the generation of electricity. So that was our rationale for not talking, because I don't think there's much electricity generated within our region our DVRPC region compared to what we consume. And so it's similar in New Jersey, I think, and it's like, I support the way it's being done on a consumption basis. However, you might do it totally on a consumption basis. And what we do is we do it on a consumption basis, and then we use the EPA's E-grid formula, which looks at emissions in the PJM RFC East territory, which includes New Jersey.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Tracy Corluccio, Delaware Riverkeeper Network. So the greenhouse gas data that you are currently collecting from electric generation, does that include fugitive emissions? And if it does, how is that accounted for? Is it a model or actual data?
The electric generating sector, no, that only captures the emissions associated with producing the electricity. The fugitive emissions as far as natural gas leaks or compressor station leaks that are part of the system of getting the fuel to the electric generating unit, they would be captured either under industrial or the highly warming gas sector. And that's certainly the leaks in pipes is something that we're looking to improve and refine the methodology, how we calculate that.
How about storage? How are you going to be calculating at the plants storage fugitive emissions?
So the gas storage would be, if there is any fugitive leaks at the facilities, they would be captured in their emissions inventory as an area source emission. So at the regulated facility, if those leaks are captured.
So do you know how they're being measured, the fugitive emissions currently? Like, what is the method that you're using? Like the rate of fugitive emissions?
Specifically methane or VOC? Do you know?
Methane.
Currently, I know that the emissions inventory on an area source basis measures or estimates VOC emissions. I don't know if it's speciated out for the specific methane emissions. So most likely they would be using emission factors in estimating that in the inventory.
And certainly, if your comment is that we are not capturing methane emissions from area sources that could be captured, that by all means make that comment. That's something, if we can improve where we are capturing the emission drivers, we would like to do that.
So just like to point out that is contrary to what you're saying there, that you intend to not make any changes. You would need to make changes.
Just want to make one clarification. With the storage and gas, anything dealing with methane, public gas utilities, those type things, those are captured not necessarily here for EGUs. Those are captured, well, they're going to be proposed to be captured through monitoring and reporting for natural gas operators.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Richmond from Blue Wave, New Jersey. My question relates not only to electric generation, but all other GHG sources. Our goal in the legislation is to reduce greenhouse gases by 80% from the 2006 level. But it seems as if the 2006 level didn't really account for all the greenhouse gases. No inventory of the kind that we're talking about today was done back in 2006. So what adjustments, if any, are you making with respect to 2006 greenhouse gas levels?
So any changes in methodology or additional greenhouse gases which we would capture would necessitate going back and doing a look back at the baseline. And as we did switch from retail sales to using the MOVES model for vehicle miles traveled, we went back and readjusted the 2006 levels because you need to have your baseline consistent with how you're tracking the progress.
So Bob, that was a very interesting point. So you're going to go back and readjust the 2006 baseline in order to determine what the end goal is for the 80% reduction?
That would happen if there is a fundamental change how we're moving forward. Essentially, if we're changing the methodology, how we calculate moving forward, we have to look what impact that has is what our starting point, because we're basing the mandate of the 80% from that 2006 levels.
No, I think that's fair. I just never thought about that before, and it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, no, and again, when we published last year's report, we acknowledged that the switch from retail sales to moves, we did go back and do that in 2006.
I don't think the mic.
A report was just published in this week's Nature magazine indicating that based upon ice cores that were looking at global methane and CO2 content in the atmosphere, that the data that was available based on other estimates was underestimating the amount of methane by 40%, more or less. So I think you want to look at your modeling, or re-examine your modeling in the event that the methane that was in the atmosphere in 2006 was much greater than what is currently assumed. That's one point. My second point is a question. One of the benefits of using natural gas to generate electricity is that you can turn it on and off like that. And given that demand varies like that, is there continuous monitoring of the smokestacks to indicate what is being emitted from the stacks on each of the generating facilities? Can anybody answer that question?
Yes, I know all of the utility electric generator units in New Jersey have continuous emission monitors, and they are also simultaneously monitored and continuously their fuel flow. So from a carbon dioxide standpoint, we know hour by hour how much fuel is used. So we have, I think that's one component of this. We have a very accurate representation of what the CO2 emissions are.
Is it based upon the fuel consumed, or is it based upon what's going out the stack?
For the criteria pollutants, that's mostly direct emission monitoring at the stack. For CO2, where you're looking at long-term emissions, and it's that is typically used EPA certified fuel flow monitors, and then established emission factors for how much CO2 is emitted from a million BTUs of the particular fuel.
Okay. One of the things with burners is that there's efficiencies every time they're turned on and turned off, the change in efficiencies, and they can change over time. So that the continuous monitoring of greenhouse gases is important if you're going to be trying to collect accurate information across the state with respect to lots of burning of lots of methane. And so I would recommend that the rules incorporate instantaneous or near instantaneous electronic transmission of stack emissions for each stack. I used to work in DEP, and I knew that at that time the air quality program was much better at doing monitoring and collecting data of what was happening than some of the other divisions. So I also know that the the U.S. Geological Survey maintains a lot of continuous monitoring stations of stream flow throughout the state so that they know what's going on in terms of water quality and quantity. And they do that by means of having radio transmissions from each of their monitoring stations to a central location. And I would seek that the department would do the same. Yes, it will cost money. There needs to be more money spent on this, and the producers of the pollution should be paying for it.
So the governor signed a law a month ago that requires you to look at 20-year time horizon for global warming potential to better capture short-lived climate pollutants, most notably black carbon, hydrofluorocarbons, and methane. So does that mean you're going to be going back and changing the baseline from 2006 when you the 2006 number doesn't look at 20-year time horizon?
Actually, we hadn't thought of that. I mean, it's a possibility. I mean, the only thing we're definitely doing is the next report out will include the 20-year piece in the inventory, but that is something to consider. We hadn't thought about.
Isn't it a mandate?
What's that?
The governor signed a law that says you have to look at it.
Yeah.
Not moving forward, but
going forward,
backwards.
we're required to look at it.
'Cause but you're saying here, when you're moving forward, then you have to look backwards too. So you're required to look forward, then don't you have to look backwards too?
I don't think we mandate us to look backwards. I think that's a good suggestion, and we'll look into it. But we're certainly next year reporting on the 20-year.
All right. I just want to make sure I understood the logic before. So if we're using more electricity than we're generating in the state, and so you're attempting to capture that if the utilities are, if we're getting electricity from out of state, to try and capture that even though it's generated out of state, we're using electricity in state, which is excellent. What I don't understand is why aren't you applying the same logic to gas? If we're burning the gas in the state, why aren't we capturing all of the emissions from generating that gas so that we can burn it from the fracking and everything else and the transporting coming in from out of state?
So the life cycle piece was never envisioned. We've always interpreted the statute to require what emissions are generated here.
But you're doing life cycle for electricity, yes. Why not gas?
Let me explain. The reason we're doing the out-of-state piece and trying to catch that generation is historically we've always been an importer until recently. But the piece there was we wanted to capture the piece that we're importing just for the fact that we could import 100% electricity and all of a sudden our emissions are nothing and we're in compliance with the rule. Right. So logically it made sense to count the electricity being used here if it's coming from out of state. As far as the life cycle argument, we never contemplated doing anything that was outside of New Jersey. And if we did, I don't know how you would capture it. We can't even pinpoint where our electricity comes from if it's coming from PJM, let alone where it's being generated. So even if I agreed 100% that's the right thing to do, I don't know how we get our hands around it.
Okay. Thank you.
One last quick, if we could do a quick Doug on this section.
Yep. All right, here we go. So Paul, I wanted to follow up on the life cycle emissions question and just to kind of summarize some of the things that we've heard in the room so far. So one, that the inventory is not going to be looking forward at emissions from future projects. The inventory is not going to take into account life cycle emissions from out of the state's borders, which I think Dave just argued, that there is a very, I think, comprehensive argument to be made that we should be looking at a state level of how we do calculate the full life cycle emissions because we're burning the gas here. And so what happens, the extraction that happens out of the state's borders, in our mind, should be included in that analysis. I wanted to bring up an example, though, that I think is top of mind for many of us, and I know the Delaware Riverkeeper Network and others in the Empower New Jersey Coalition have been constantly in touch with the department and other state agencies, and that's the concern of having New Jersey be the home to one of the largest export facilities for LNG here on the East Coast. Just yesterday, Oregon denied a permit for the Jordan Cove LNG facility in state. And so obviously, there could be an argument made that New Jersey is a conduit for LNG that should not be counted in an inventory. We would argue the exact opposite, that New Jersey has a decision-making process on whether to allow this facility to exist in its borders. And if, I want to, this is obviously speculative, we don't want this project to move forward, but it defeats the point of an inventory if you're not including the total greenhouse gas impact of a fuel which the state will decide whether it can be exported or not from the state. So I wanted to kind of throw out that projection because these are issues that obviously are being considered right now, and we can't deny the carbon impacts, even if they're not burned in here, or even if they're burned in the state or extracted in the state.
Yes, your point's well taken. I mean, obviously, the siting of a facility like that's outside the scope of this rule, but certainly I understand the position.
Okay, what we need to do is wrap this section up as well. If anyone has comments that you haven't shared yet, we will have time at the end of the meeting, or feel free to email them in. But we do need to move on to the next section. Thanks for all your input with that. Okay, Kai.
So now we're here at the point of talking about the gas public utility. This is required in the legislation that monitoring and reporting of greenhouse gas emissions come from any gas public utility. And there is information already being reported on federal forms, and the state of New Jersey would do similar annual reporting as required as part of this rulemaking. So the department intends to require monitoring and reporting of these greenhouse gas emissions from any gas public utility. And that, as a definition, means any public utility that distributes gas to end users within the state. So now I'm going to make a pretty important distinction here. This legislation also requires reporting from fossil fuels used in the state and it identified natural gas pipelines. One other distinction I want to make here is that methane releases would be considered under the section of this legislation that talks about significant contribution of greenhouse gas emissions that the department would evaluate. So putting those three things together, we're going to be requiring, or we intend to require, a comprehensive reporting that we would call from natural gas operations or operators, okay? So looking at it from the gas public utility perspective, the pipeline perspective, and as a emitter of methane. So this kind of culminates into one way that we would look at the reporting. Now, reporting in this sector for natural gas operators will be to collect information on the following: the volume of gas that is received, distributed, and stored, the number of customers, and fuel use. So, for example, if the fuel use is for residential, commercial, industrial, or for electric power or vehicle use. Greenhouse gas emissions from natural gas operations would include things like from equipment leaks, from valves, connectors, open-ended lines, pressure relief valves, and meters. Additionally, we'd be looking at different operations that are conducted in the natural gas industry that occur here in New Jersey, and that would be like things like blowdowns, venting, flaring, storage tanks, compressing, and other operational activities regulated under the federal greenhouse gas reporting program for these natural gas operators. So what you see here is the kind of the network of information that we're trying to collect to address three distinct sections of this legislation. So now for the feedback that we're looking for, first of all, are there additional obstacles or costs associated with doing direct monitoring and reporting to the state? Are there any concerns proceeding as described for this sector? C, currently transmission line emissions are estimated by factors per mile of linear pipe. That includes also the type of pipe that that the gas is traveling through. So if it's cast iron, plastic, or something like that. Are there other methods that should be employed to estimate these emissions? And D, are there better ways to collect greenhouse gas emissions monitoring and reporting information from natural gas operators and gas public utilities that the department should consider? So we'll open it up.
Some of this has been covered this morning. We'll take two comments on these questions. I'll start with you.
Yeah, when we were doing this for the Greater Philadelphia region, we we're surprised by that there are some users, large users of natural gas that do not purchase through a utility. They purchase directly from the transmission pipelines, and and it's difficult to discover who those users are because the pipeline companies, they're private contracts. We had it was a steam generator that generated steam for a steam loop that purchased its outside, I guess it's called the city gate. It bought it outside of that. So I don't know how you will identify those, but you might try to talk to some of the pipeline operators and get a sense. And then on the third question, when you say transmission lines, are you also talking about the distribution lines, or is that just the transmission lines?
That would be for both.
For both, okay. So for the transmission lines, pretty much any gas utility knows exactly how much gas they buy and how much gas they sell, and the difference is leak. So you can almost certainly get that information once the gas leaves the transmission system and enters the natural gas utilities distribution system. The leakage in the transmission systems are probably more difficult to get a handle on. Although similarly, the people who put the gas in the transmission lines knows how much money they get from selling it, and the difference is the leakage.
Okay, thank you.
Tracy Carluccio, Delaware Riverkeeper Network. What about including pressure in the pipes as one of the factors? Have you looked at that?
As one of the things that we're looking at when we evaluated this particular industry, we're looking at the federal forms that are and how they report those emissions. So as far as emission factors go, I'm not 100% certain as to knowing exactly what that estimation is to calculate that. If pressure is part of it, I would think that it might be, but I don't know for a fact.
I suggest that be looked at. And also, is flaring captured, and how is that captured?
So flaring would be captured in two ways. Flaring is a control method for gas releases. So methane that's emitted, the portion of methane that's emitted would have to be calculated as a methane emission, but if it's actually being flared, then it would be a CO2 emission.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Sure, thank you. Are you thinking of doing on-time monitoring from some of these facilities? I mean, blowdowns are kind of hard to calculate because they happen, sort of irregularly at times. And so I was wondering if you're going to think about having real-time monitoring on some of this stuff, and also, a lot of our systems are leaking, because of the old pipes at about 20% or even higher. And so to really figure out, again, the localized impacts as well, from having a monitoring system to understand how much is leaking and where, and also, measuring blowdowns and accidents and explosions and everything else that kind of happens in the natural gas world.
We would be trying to capture those events when they happen. They would have to be reported. Currently, they are being reported just in the way that the department is notified. So we know that these events occur. We don't know the quantities that occur when they happen. So as part of the reporting rule, when these events occur, those emissions would have to be quantified.
We have several comments on this topic.
Hi.
We have 3 more lined up, and then we're going to have to move on, so go ahead.
All right, thanks. My questions and comments relate to the timing of your rules, not only with respect to gas, but all greenhouse gas emissions. Hopefully, I'm preaching to the choir and saying that time is of the essence with respect to all of your work here. Now, it appears to me from looking at the 2019 legislation, updating the Global Warming Response Act, which was enacted, it became effective in July 2019, you had 18 months to adopt final rules with respect to monitoring and reporting greenhouse gas regulations. And that would take you to January 2021, if I'm looking at what your calendar is now, you're pushing that back to June 2021. So I guess I have a three-part question. Number one, is your calendar out of compliance with what the legislation and your own rules require? Two, are you capable of getting these rules in place as the legislation requires by January 2021? And three, if you don't think you are capable, what additional resources do you need to get this done in a timely way?
So the first question is, I believe your timing you explained is correct. It is unlikely that we'll have a final rule in place pursuant to the legislative date. I think best case scenario, we'd be a couple months after that. The executive order is 6 months prior or 6 months after the legislative date. I think we're going to fall somewhere in between. So I think we'll be close to that January date, but you're probably looking at spring for the final rule.
I mean, can you follow up? Do you need additional resources? I mean, look, this should not be business as usual, and I appreciate, all of your hard work. But what additional resources do you need to get this done by the statutorily mandated date of January 2021?
It's not simply just a resource issue at this point. Like Bob had explained, you probably have a team of 20 people working on this to some degree. The process, the administrative process going through the rules does take time simply. The framing, we're probably projected doing this 6 months faster from launch date to publication date than you would a regular rule. So it is being expedited, but I can't commit that you're going to have it exactly in January 2021. Certainly could be February, March, or past that.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, we have a question. We have 3 more comments lined up. Any new ones, we're going to have to wait till the end to write them down. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Mary Barber, Environmental Defense Fund. In the Energy Master Plan, I don't have it in front of me. I might not get it exactly right, but I think it says, the BPU will instruct or direct the gas utilities to begin to use advanced leak detection and quantification across their systems. So do you know yet how that's going to happen such that you'll be able to have that more, granular and refined data?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for the board, public utilities, even though they're sitting here. But no, we work very closely with BPU, so we will certainly let that inform anything we're doing in our rule to make sure that not only that they complement each other. So there's no question there.
Because that obviously is going to capture captures the leakage issue much better in the distribution system. So it'll be important to move that quickly.
Absolutely.
Kim Scarborough, PSEG. Just a quick question. You mentioned that you would require similar reports to what we're reporting to EPA. Can you explain what the differences might be?
So yes, Kim. So I guess the question is, does the mandates in the Act allow us to just defer to the information that's reported to the federal government? And if that information meets the quality levels that we need, that we're using now, then we just want to continue to use that information. If it becomes more of a regulatory legalistic point that, no, the Act says that it has to be reported to the state, and there's just no way around it, it has to be reported to the state. Much in the vein that we've done with the RGGI program, where anything has to be reported, we want to take that same information and have the facility report it to us. So whether it's, the same electronic form, if it maybe can't fit into the portal system here, we may have to, massage that somewhat, but we want to just avoid any duplicative efforts where you have to reinvent a form or a submittal mechanism. So our effort is that, look, if the data is what we really need and we're getting that, we don't want to reinvent the wheel because there's limited resources on both sides, and we want to make sure that we get better data from places that we need it and not be overly burdensome on when we have very comprehensive data.
To Mary Barber's point, up until this point and continuing, we've worked in partnership with the Board of Public Utility, with the DEP on all of this, and we'll continue. We've talked to the gas utilities in setting up that provision, that goal in the Energy Master Plan, and we'll continue to do that. So I don't, other than PSEG, I don't see any other gas utilities around the room, but we can, sorry about that. We'll let you answer that question.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Nick Taracco from SJI. Just along those same lines, I was going to mention that I hope there will be coordination between the department, continued coordination between DEP and BPU, because I think much of the information that is sought to be collected from the utilities is already provided in some manner to the BPU. So it'd be great to try to, create some efficiencies there, because ultimately the ratepayers are going to shoulder those compliance costs. So we want to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts. But also along those same lines, and with respect to coordination, in some respects, the Energy Master Plan talks about limiting investments going forward in natural gas infrastructure. But here we're really talking about capturing information about leakage and other types of things, so that ostensibly at the end, so we can limit emissions. So I think there's a little bit of a disconnect that I hope can get resolved, because we the gas utilities have done a lot of work over the last 8 years and spending a lot of money in infrastructure improvements to address leaking pipes, methane, all those kinds of things. So I want to make sure that we're not sort of at crossways with what the EMP seems to suggest going forward and what we're doing with DEP. So I would just ask for continued coordination there. Thank you.
Okay, what I'd like to, we have to end this section, this topic. Slide 22, you guys know the topic, you know the questions we were asking about. If you have comments, feel free to save them till the end of the meeting or email them to staff. Go ahead, Kai.
Thank you.
And thanks, everyone.
Okay, now we're getting to that part of the legislation that says, well, are there other significant sources? And there's going to be the requiring of greenhouse gas emissions from any significant emitters of greenhouse gases as determined by the department. So when we take a look at what the other significant sources of greenhouse gas emissions may be, and we're looking at those that are considered short-lived climate pollutants, we come up with methane emissions, Hfcs, and black carbon. And just to cover them just quickly here, methane emissions, we see that the majority of those come from landfills and natural gas system losses. Hfcs, the majority of those come from refrigerants. And then black carbon in New Jersey, the emissions that we'll be looking at would be from diesel emissions. So to cover methane emissions first, the department intends to require monitoring and reporting from sources of significant methane emissions, and which may include from these landfills, natural gas system losses, and biogas generation. The information that we're going to be collecting will be done through various methods. So the department intends to amend one of our regulations on emission statements, so allowing major emitters of methane to submit emission statements annually. So currently, methane emissions may be reported or may be required to be having some information, but they're not necessarily required to submit that as an emission statement. This would be a change in a particular regulation. So emitters of methane over 100 tons per year and hold that Title V air permit, these would now be submitting emission statement reporting. This would also include landfill gas, biogas generation, and other sources of methane emissions of 100 tons per year or more. And those would be emissions, not what they generate. Then methane emissions from natural gas system losses would also be reported under the same forms that we talked about before for the natural gas operators. So that's how we would be capturing methane emissions from natural gas system losses. Now, so we're looking for feedback. We would like to understand, are there significant sources of methane emissions that the department should consider for this rulemaking? Are there better ways of collecting greenhouse gas monitoring and reporting information from methane emissions that the department should consider?
Tracy Carluccio. So my question is, what about the manufacturing sector? It's very difficult to actually, carefully and accurately measure methane releases overall, but one of the big areas that is overlooked typically is manufacturing. So plastics manufacturing, for instance, other sorts of manufacturing, cement, aluminum, steel, these sources use natural gas and emit methane. So even if they don't use natural gas as a fuel source, they emit methane in their processing. So how are you going to capture these? Because it is considered by some most recent scientific articles to be up to 2% accounting for methane fugitive emissions.
So in New Jersey, a number of their industrial processes that would include methane emissions really are kind of restricted to the fossil fuel industry. We don't have cement manufacturing in New Jersey. Steel manufacturing in New Jersey is either very, very small or custom, but not to the production levels that you might have in other parts of the country. So when it comes to plastics manufacturing, those are like people that are using methane and cracking systems. Again, not necessarily a large component in New Jersey. So when we look at significant emissions of methane, that's the key thing there. They would have to be significant in some way, shape, or form for us to start counting them. But let me tell you, if they are generating 100 tons per year, we would consider them to be significant, and they would have to submit on an emission statement.
Yeah, Rob Graff, two comments. One is, are you looking at sulfur hexafluoride as has a very high global warming potential and is used as, I believe, an insulator in like electricity substations and so forth?
Okay. You know, we are aware of the sources of the SF6, and they are very limited and they're very small. You know, as far as the greenhouse gas inventory goes, I think they're like 0.1% or something like this. So we are aware of them and we know where they are, but as far as emissions go from them, yes, you're absolutely right. They are very highly warming, but not necessarily something that we're going to be chasing down in this reporting rule. As far as we can see, we see them as being insignificant.
And also agricultural emissions, both from livestock and from application of fertilizers on land. How are those being considered?
For agriculturally speaking, if they're doing something that generates a lot of biogas and they're having emissions from that source, that would be something that we'd be looking at as a pollutant. And if they are meeting the 100 tons per year, they would be covered. Otherwise, I think that the sources in New Jersey would be insignificant.
Okay, yeah, you can look at the agricultural census, if you may have already done that, and determine whether that de minimis is a correct opinion or not. Thanks.
Thank you.
A couple of points. One, are you looking at sewer plants as well, especially, and you know, we have tremendous amount of them in the state, and not only producing at the plant, but also all the sludge.
Right. So again, if they are having emissions from the methane sources, from their digesters, anaerobic or anaerobic, and those emissions are meeting 100 tons per year, they would be included in the emission statement reporting.
Okay. I want to follow up. I mean, we do a lot of composting in New Jersey, so we should be monitoring that as well. But there are farm fields where we're spreading food waste on, and they're like 100+ acres, and you can smell it a long way away. And then the other point on picking up on the manufacturing, we use a lot of cement in New Jersey, and that itself is a major source of CO2 and greenhouse gases in the drying process. And again, if we're bringing in the cement from out of state, we need to be looking at the life cycle everywhere. You know, same thing on the pellets from, he's not for plastic and everything else. If we're looking at the manufacturing sector, we can't keep isolating everything on just what's here. It's what we're bringing here and using. I mean, states are now, especially California, others are really looking at other alternatives to cement because there's just such a big greenhouse gas emitter. So if we don't capture and understand all those different pieces, we're never going to get to where we really need to be, that the 80% reduction is really going to be like a 40% reduction when you look at what's actually happening in the state, and that's a concern. And my final point is that, you know, there is a real climate urgency happening right now in the state, and the timelines that we have keep pushing things out. Look, we've had the ability to regulate greenhouse gases since 2005. We've had the ability to do this monitoring since 2007, and we're so behind the curve. So one of the things I would ask is, as we're putting this together, is to try to move it as quickly as possible and not miss deadlines, but actually try to make deadlines or get ahead of deadlines. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Sherpal Guran, Rutgers Eco Complex. One clarifying question for flare efficiency. If somebody is destructing methane, either if it's in the form of landfill gas or biogas or pure methane, what's the efficiency that, I'm not in the permitting, so it's been a long time. So what is the flare efficiency? How much it's considered, or is it being reported? And obviously I'd like to echo for the pockets of methane formation while doing composting also, how much it's being, considered. I'd like to underline these things. Thank you. I was asking for the flare efficiency.
Okay. Thank you, Serpil. It's been a while since I reviewed the permits, but the typically and I'm going to say typically, what we have required in New Jersey in air permitting is to require enclosed flares. So to that extent, from what I recall, enclosed flares are typically greater than 90% efficient. It's the candlestick flares at the landfills, where maybe a few still exist, that are not as efficient. But the challenge is, if you don't have the BTU content of the gas and the volume of gas going through there, it can't support the enclosed flare. So wherever technically feasible, we require enclosed flares, and the candlestick flares providing, obviously an odor mitigation benefit, and to the extent the oxidations, even at 60% changing methane, oxidizing the CO2, you're lowering the global warming potential. So clearly, whenever possible, enclosed flares with sufficient flow and BTU content is the preferred way to go.
Okay, I have a comment here and then there. Go ahead.
David Pringle, Clean Water Action. Are you considering flatulence in terms of dairy farms? And how far along that distribution pipe are you counting? What happens when pipes get into houses? Given all of the uses for gas in houses, there's leakage there too. Any individual home is obviously not even close to 100 tons, but the cumulative, the accumulation of 8 million homes or 4 million homes and all the appliances is, skyrocketing over 100 tons.
So yes, Dave, the residential sector captures the full use of natural gas. So if it's used in heaters or stoves, or yes, we capture that in the residential. It's funny you bring up the other point, because in meeting with agriculture, we had a lot of questions and suggestions about how you could reduce methane from agriculture, and feeding farm animals different food was one of the things that came up. I don't know how significant that is in New Jersey. In meeting with Department of Ag, we don't have the concentrated area feeding operations at Delaware and Maryland. We don't have, as the dairy farms have gone down dramatically. Most of our large animal farming is equine now. So certainly there's opportunity for reduction there. That would be a component of the 2050
First, we have to
report.
count to help figure out.
Yeah, I think that the challenge is to, again, when we look at the inventory and we're trying to get the greatest reduction, we have to look at the sectors and where the regulatory authority is and where the greatest get is. And so we take that comment. If there is a lot of get from the equine industry in New Jersey, please provide us with that.
All right. Isn't DEP's regulatory authority that you have to reduce greenhouse gases 80% by 2050 from 2006 levels?
Yes, absolutely.
So,
And what we
you know,
want
you
to
have
do
the
is-
authority, whether you need to use it judiciously, but any source of
That's
greenhouse
a key
gases,
word
you have the
there,
authority
yeah,
to cut,
yeah.
correct?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, but the judicious use of that is identifying where the emission drivers are and getting to get there. That's why if we're missing something, if the equine industry is a significant contributor and we should be looking at how to do that, please provide that. But I mean, right now, I think that the meeting with agriculture says it's not a significant New Jersey issue.
Okay, and I just want to echo a point that John and Jeff have made in terms of urgency and meeting and beating deadlines. We have no time. If you believe the science, we have to be cutting greenhouse gases 45% by 2030. The Administrative Procedure Act obviously takes time, but it also has a wonderful mechanism when you don't have time, when you do have an emergency. And if you believe the science, we have an emergency here. The administration has the authority to do emergency rules. You could have done them today. The governor could have done, instead of an executive order giving you 2 years, he could have done an executive order adopting a rule immediately. So we would like the department, I know you're overwhelmed and underfunded and it's ridiculous, but you have to do more. You have to move faster, and an emergency order would give you the cover to do so, because you're going to have to move fast if you have, if you have an emergency order and a moratorium going on.
Now, what I need to do is wrap up. We have 3 things that we need to cover for other significant sources, and we need your feedback on. I know there's several hands up. Jot down your ideas. If we could get to them at the end of the open session, we will do that. I'm sorry that we can't get to everybody. We're going to go on to the next substance or topic.
Thank you. Okay, so HFC emissions, hydrofluorocarbons, the department intends to require reporting from significant emitters of hydrofluorocarbons, these HFCs. Now, HFCs are used in refrigeration systems, heating and cooling. They're also used for aerosols and foam manufacturing. Now, if I direct you to the pie chart there, this is the breakdown in New Jersey of how these HFCs are being utilized. So a majority of those HFCs are used in the refrigeration type systems. So using as a refrigerant either for heating and cooling systems or in like warehousing, commercial, industrial type refrigeration systems. So we've made the determination that refrigerants, since they make up actually specifically 87.7% of New Jersey's overall HFC inventory, we are considering this to be significant. The others are much smaller, and then even that as an overall view of what they're emitting into the greenhouse gas inventory is even smaller. So we're going to be focused on the HFCs from refrigerants. So HFC reporting will be collecting from manufacturers and distributors of HFCs within the state. These are refrigerants that are used in the refrigeration and air conditioning to cool and heat, dehumidify spaces, things that are like rooms, cabinets, refrigerator cabinets, and office buildings, warehouses. The department intends to develop a reporting form to collect this information from HFC sales, from manufacturers and distributors, and the information will be used to estimate emissions from leaks and repairs. So we're back to feedback time again. A, are there additional obstacles and costs associated with reporting HFC sales directly to the department? B, are there any concerns for how we're thinking to proceed in this sector? Are there significant sources of HFC emissions that the department should consider for this rulemaking? And are there better ways to collect monitoring and reporting information from HFC sources that the department should consider?
And I'm looking for folks who haven't.
Eric DeJezero, Fuel Merchants Association. To what extent The Energy Master Plan wants everybody to have a heat pump, primarily air sourced, although it could be geothermal. To what extent is the one hand, the push for heat pumps, and the other fact that there is an HFC component with the gas in a heat pump system, how are you reconciling that?
Well, one of the things with the heat pump systems, yes, you're going to have these refrigerants in them, but we're looking to improve on the technology in HFCs to find the ones that are have a low global warming gas potential, and that would be the shift in the industry that's happening now anyway. So hopefully as time progresses, we're finding refrigerants that can be utilized that have lower global warming potential.
Yeah, one of the ironies of this, of course, is that the CFCs, which cause the ozone hole, have a much lower global warming potential than the refrigerants that replace them, which have a higher global warming potential. However, there is still I assume, a lot of CFCs circulating in systems, cooling systems throughout New Jersey that have not, that are just old systems that have been around for many years. And those systems, I assume, are supposed to be handled when they're replaced or disposed of. If you dispose of an old air conditioner, the CFCs are supposed to be recovered in a proper manner, but my guess is in many cases that doesn't happen. It just would be interesting to know how you're trying to estimate sort of the disposal of coolants and the CFCs and HFCs that are disposed of from disposed or demolished buildings and so forth.
Right.
Just if you could think about that, I'd appreciate just a comment.
Well, as far as the regulation, there are regulations in effect for the capture and destruction of HFCs, CFCs, okay? If somebody isn't doing that properly, there's penalties associated with that, so there would be an enforcement action. But these things are done not right now at the state level, they're done at the federal level. So, I mean, it would have to be a federal type action.
I'm not seeing any hands up on this topic. Okay, I do now. Go ahead, Toby.
Kai, I think you showed the pie chart showing the breakdown within the HFCs. I think if we showed a pie chart of what their contribution on a CO2e basis to the total inventory is, I think it's somewhere around 4%. So we're talking about a pretty small wedge of the overall pie. The fact that you're going to the suppliers in some way eases that, maybe comparable to its overall weight in the inventory. But looking at how you're going to go from distributor information to emissions is interesting. I don't know what you're thinking in terms of how do you convert sales to releases or leaks when a lot of that materials, well, you'd have the borders of the state. Some of it might go out of New Jersey, and you also much of it's going into new equipment perhaps, and it's not a loss. It's just charging new equipment. Do you have factors for that yet, or how are you coming to that?
Okay. As far as emission factors go, there are ways that the federal government is currently calculating these type emissions, and that we've done in our greenhouse gas inventory in the past. We would be relying on existing emission factors. Now, if there are better ways of doing it, if there are, other ways to collect this information that's more accurate, we're welcoming that kind of comment.
Just a follow-up, do you know how many suppliers, distributors there are in the state? What's the population?
As far as manufacturers go, I think we have 2 manufacturers in the state, And as far as suppliers go, we don't have a handle on that yet.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up for this topic. So we're going to move on to the last and then our open discussion. And the last is on black carbon.
So black carbon emissions, first of all, it's a short-lived climate pollutant, and since diesel emissions are the main contributing source of black carbon in New Jersey, the department intends to calculate black carbon emissions from diesel fuel usage data. So the data will be collected from the fossil fuel manufacturers and distributors on the state reporting forms that we intend to create. And the department will calculate black carbon emissions based on the fuel use and volume. So any of the information that we're doing here would be based on emission factors. So the question is, are there other significant sources of black carbon emissions that the department should consider for this rulemaking? And B, are there better ways to collect black carbon monitoring and reporting information from diesel sources that the department should consider?
Well, diesel is absolutely the major source. Gas plants and all fossil fuel generation is a source. So anywhere you're burning fossil fuels, you're emitting soot and should be included, especially given how much more potent it is as a greenhouse gas than CO2.
Hi, I'm Sharon Brown with Ethos Energy. I just wanted to ask if the department would consider consider timing with regard to any compliance testing that may come out of this rulemaking, to have it timed if we have additional requirements for testing to coincide with existing permit mandated compliance testing. It'll help mitigate some of the financial burden of compliance, and also you can have multiple data points. You're already doing compliance testing for certain things. So if there are subsequent requirements for additional compliance testing, whether it be quarterly or annual, like maybe have things coincide in some cases, like with RADAs. So.
Thank you. Does anyone want to comment on that, or?
I mean, yes, I will. Just to say, yes, I agree. And the department has a long history, having previously worked in the stack testing group, to where testing is required, understanding that the mobilization of the testing equipment is a significant cost associated with it, that we want to avoid multiple mobilizations. So to do a longer comprehensive test program has long been the way that we've managed the stack test program here.
Jarred my thought process when you said that. There's another element, and this may not be applicable here, but it's a general comment. Some of the compliance testing generates more emissions than you actually do as a consequence of burning fuel for, in the process industry, perhaps their process, and the electric generation segment, electric generation. So there may be some thought that should be applied to compliance testing if a unit hasn't run all year, and then you have to do a 5-year compliance test, and then you burn all of this fuel for compliance testing. That's something to consider too as well.
Thank you. Good suggestions. Okay, I'm going down here to Jeff.
Being able to monitor black carbon is actually relatively easy, and I think expanding our ambient air quality network for particulates and black carbon would be probably a good way of being able to pick up where the hot spots are and the worst areas are. And then the same thing, as I said, we should be expanding our network for methane as well, and including methane in our network. so we can identify those and other greenhouse gases, but that would be an easy way to do it. And also, you can require it as part of real-time reporting on your Title V permittings and permits and things like that. We have the ability to do it. It's a relatively cheap, monitoring system to be able to do it, so thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
A couple comments on black carbon. We thought about this a lot in our work. And one of the challenges is it's not really a greenhouse gas per se. It has an impact on global warming, but part of that depends on where it falls. If black carbon falls on a black roof, it adds no real increase to or decrease to the albedo, which is where the global warming would come from. But if it ends up in the Greenland ice sheet, it has a much different impact. So this, it's a challenge. Just making that comment. And the other issue is there's a lot of articles recently on PM 2.5 from tire wear. In fact, that electric vehicles with their tire wear will still have a significant impact on air quality. And I imagine, I don't know a whole lot about black carbon, but it seems that the tire wear particles would have similar impact on global warming as would diesel particulate matter. So, and there's a lot of tire wear in New Jersey, so I don't know how you're taking that into account.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Tracy Carluccio, Delaware Riverkeeper Network. I see you point out that black carbon is short-lived, and you consider it mainly from diesel, but I think it's also important to realize that it is much more potent as a greenhouse gas, and it's also very, very dirty. And it's associated with urban areas and transportation corridors. So many of our communities are disproportionately burdened by black carbon. So that should mean that there should be an urgency to move this to the front of the line in terms of addressing it. So just want to put that out there as something I think you should reflect when you're discussing the properties of black carbon.
Okay, thank you. Anybody who hasn't shared out on black carbon yet have something to say that they'd like to share?
I just wanted to make a quick addendum to what Tracy was saying. But I don't believe I saw a reference to EO23 and environmental justice. That clearly should be guiding the conversation on black carbon, and beyond just being referenced in the document, should be guiding the importance of regulating black carbon in EJ communities.
Thanks, Doug. Go ahead.
While black carbon isn't a gas chemically, the law defines a greenhouse gas as basically anything the DEP declares as a greenhouse gas that contributes to global warming. So in this instance, whether you've legally defined it yet that way or not, black carbon is absolutely a greenhouse gas, and the governor's made very clear that DEP has to get a handle on it. Another source we haven't talked about that is significant is home heating oil.
Can you say that again?
Another home heating oil.
Home heating oil, okay.
Oil furnaces.
Okay.
And I mean, also, for these purposes, just because we're listing all the sources of greenhouse gases doesn't mean that everything has to be cut by 80%. We need to know what the total inventory is and cut it by 80%. You might cut some things totally and some things not at all.
Good point. Okay. Toby, is that you? No. Okay. Anyone who hasn't
for your input. The information that you're sharing here today, the comments that you're making are going to definitely guide us in the rulemaking process. So, and as being somebody who registered for this meeting, if if it's okay with you, if you've made some substantive comments or that you're in an industry that we have some particular questions for, I hope it's okay that we reach back out to you as stakeholders and, involve you in some of the processes that we go through as we develop this rule. Greenhouse gas monitoring and reporting is required from specific sources. So that's what we are trying to identify today. The legislation has said, the department should go forth and make rules on certain sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And those that are to be determined as being significant by the department. So is there anything that we have not covered that we should be addressing for this rulemaking?
So two things that I haven't heard discussed today, and one is logging. The DEP, Fish and Wildlife, are logging New Jersey's forests, public lands, hundreds of acres a year. And while, logging will increase greenhouse gases, it's going to release, carbon, matter that was already sequestered, and it also prevents further sequestration. So basic question is, why the hell are we logging our forests instead of protecting them and using it to achieve your 80% goal? Instead, we're making it worse and making it harder to achieve that goal. Second question is, have we considered fire? And by fire, we could talk about forest fires, brush fires, as well as wood-burning stoves and fireplaces. There's a lot of wood being sold in New Jersey that's being burned.
All right. Well, thank you for your comment about the logging. As far as black carbon goes, diesel emissions are the larger component of that. But the next one would be biomass. So as far as biomass goes, that would be anything that's containing like wood or straw or something that's vegetative and is burned. Yes, forest fires do contribute to that, but basically they're uncontrollable. When they happen and they're uncontrollable, that's a problem. Yes, they're going to contribute to black carbon. Prescribed burns, they're part of our forest management system. They're for the safety of New Jersey residents, for property, and for people. So I think that forest management and making sure that people that live in and around forested areas are protected is still going to be a paramount decision over anything else that we would be doing. So, but as far as for this inventory and this rulemaking, we're not focused on biomass.
But those were good suggestions, so keep them coming.
A couple of sources I didn't hear mentioned, soil cleaning facilities. We have some in New Jersey. We have some significant ones, and many of those facilities clean soil that's been contaminated with hydrocarbons. So that's one that should be looked at. Another was mentioned, but I don't think we really heard a good answer to it. What about storage that's not connected with a facility that you're already including, such as caverns that are storing liquid gases as well as other sorts of fossil fuels, and also on the ground, above ground storage. And then liquefied natural gas and liquefied hazardous gases such as natural gas liquids. These are an emerging source of emissions. We don't have a lot of this in New Jersey, and if the liquefied natural gas export facility is finally approved by New Jersey and other agencies for the Delaware River in Gloucester County, we will become an exporter of liquefied natural gas, and what that is going, as well as liquefied hazardous gases. And what that's going to do is attract more of that sort of industry. When we consider the federal administration is pushing very hard to support and induce the export of liquefied gases, particularly LNG right now. We really have to brace for that in New Jersey and start measuring and require that the greenhouse gas emissions from export facilities be counted. The other LNG and LHG, but particularly LNG because it's poised to expand greatly with the proposed federal rulemaking, is the use of rail, and somebody brought that up earlier. But how do we, of course, federal government has jurisdiction over rail. We know that. We have to comply with the Interstate Commerce Commission. But is there some way that New Jersey can, stretch the envelope, look outwards, and try to put a control on the leakage of liquefied gases as they travel through New Jersey? And I know this is something we don't do now, but we are facing unprecedented onslaughts of how fossil fuels, particularly methane, and in this case liquefied gases, are being marketed. And we're going to see ourselves, because we have so many freight lines in New Jersey and we have so many ports, both on the Delaware and then on the coast, we're going to see ourselves as a target for the increased transport and export of gases that are liquefied. So I think we really need to take a strong look at that. I don't see where it fits in with what you've talked about this morning, but I think it's critical because we are actually permitting some of these facilities, such as the Gibbstown facility. And then finally, I just want to say small sources collectively do add up. So you're talking about, the 100 tons per year as a threshold. How are we going to capture these small sources? And one way that that can be done is through atmospheric testing. And many scientists today, academic institutions, are measuring through atmospheric testing from the air these various sources of emissions. And sometimes we're not going to be able to pin it down to a specific source. So how are we going to really find out what's going on in terms of New Jersey's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions? Well, I would say that we can have all the methodology we want, but we got to field test it. And to actually do some atmospheric data collection could be very valuable.
Thank you. Any comment? Okay. Okay, I'm coming over to you. I'd like to also use this time, I know we're answering that question. I saw people jotting stuff down, especially on methane, to be talked about later, and this is that time. So please feel free to share, and I encourage a lot of you who are here and haven't said much. So, if you came here for a certain reason, this also is a time to say or share what you'd like to.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Laura Miner with Forces. First of all, I'd like to just say, obviously this is a global issue. It's not being addressed on a federal level, so good for New Jersey for addressing it on a state level, because places like California have, 1,000 different climate action plans, which makes it really hard for people to comply with. So for New Jersey to be able to comply with it on a state level, is good for the state. And, my question, I've done air permitting for over 25 years, and the federal clean air regulations, if you're a Title V source, you pay emission fees for those emissions. And I think a lot of the stakeholders will want to know or be interested with this rulemaking or future rulemaking. Is New Jersey going to be looking at fees associated with their greenhouse gas emissions?
I mean, the fee structure reporting is really beyond the scope of the reporting rule, so I don't have any.
Yeah, well, it's certainly adding, it would be for CO2, for instance, it would be considered in the rulemaking when we work on that, certainly. I'm sure if we discuss that, that's something we can put on the table. But for this rulemaking is obviously outside this scope, but for the next one on CO2, it certainly would be a consideration.
Okay, thank you. We have another comment. Go ahead.
Lexi Asmus, Eastern Environmental Law Center, and I'd just like to follow up with what Tracy Carlucci from the Delaware Riverkeeper was saying in regard to the export market. I mean, we have a relatively new source of gas in the Appalachians, natural gas. It's plentiful, and industry is trying to move it to the coast to export it. There have been many planned pipelines for New Jersey to do such a thing, and even things like using eminent domain as a way to export gas, which blows my mind. But I would ask the department, is there any way that you can weigh in on this? Why is New Jersey, participating in this?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, participating in.
Well, I mean, I know the New Jersey DEP is involved with permitting for pipelines, and I know we're discussing greenhouse gases. Is there a connection between those two areas of the department? That the big picture is that's really what's going on. I mean, natural gas from the Appalachians, which is now available due to new fracking techniques. Industry wants to move it to the coast to export it. The U.S. has now become a natural gas exporter. And I don't think New Jersey needs to approve any pipelines to export natural gas. And they certainly shouldn't use eminent domain to take anybody's land for the export market.
Right, your point's well understood. I mean, as far as our participation, obviously we do have to process applications as they come in with what regulatory authority we do have, but you can see from Office of Attorney General and our actions on the pipelines, we certainly have similar concerns. But your point's well taken.
Thanks. I mean, you have Credit Suisse initiating coverage of master gas pipelines and telling everybody to invest. The export market's going to grow. You have them advertising on radio stations to tell investors to invest. I mean, we don't have to go down this path. Come on.
Okay. Thank you. Good point. Go ahead, Toby.
Thank you, Toby Hanna from ERM again. Two quick questions and maybe one that's a little bit longer. What year are we talking about for reporting? What's the first reporting year under this?
That would be, it would start next year and every year after.
So 2021 would be the first reporting year, but we don't have final rules until 2021.
Your first report would be 2022 on 2021 data.
Right.
Is what we're envisioning.
And we're shooting to have a final rule by, is it June 2021?
Hopefully a little sooner, but yes.
So starting January, we need to be tracking the right information to be able to report without a final rule.
Correct.
We've been in that paradigm before with EPA and with New Jersey emission statements. It's just a caution that generally you need to have a final rule in place well ahead of the reporting year so that you can actually have systems in place that you know certainly will meet the requirements of that rule.
Yes, understood. Understood.
Second question was, you mentioned that the 2006 baseline is going to be updated. When will that be published so that we can all follow along?
Yeah, no, the updating of the baseline would be contingent on some methodology change. So if we incorporate some enhancement the way of now, we would have to do, look back and see where the updating is appropriate. So there's no schedule for updating baseline until methodology was changed in the current year that would necessitate the baseline update.
Oh, I thought the transportation model was changed and that we were going to have to go back and
do
it for that.
We did. We did a look back for when we changed the moves last year. We did a look back to 2006 to reassess what our 2050 projected level would be to meet the 80.
Okay. So will that new 2006 baseline be stated in, will that be in the 2050 report, I guess?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll see it there coming up soon. Okay. And then last one was just, most of these sections started out with the term significant, what we consider to be significant, or what the statute requires you, or the administrative order requires you to determine what is significant. How much of that has been done, and how much of that is still to be done? Can you give us some examples of what significant is? Really, where I'm coming from is where you get to the diminishing returns of extra effort, extra expense to quantify emissions that aren't really material, and you could be spending that money on mitigating the emissions or something more productive instead.
Yeah, no, I can't tell you a percent of the inventory or a basis that we're using for significant, but as part of this rule process, we're looking at that and understanding some things that may not be significant for a annual greenhouse gas inventory may still be significant for localized air quality issues. So making a distinction between those two, but I don't have a quick answer for you that a percent of the total inventory is significant this way, and that's going to be part of what we're looking at in the rulemaking
Still
process.
To be determined. Okay,
yes.
That's what I was looking for. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, thanks. We have a question back here. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I asked this question. Hi. Okay. I asked this question a little earlier regarding aviation. Since other states can't regulate the tailpipe emissions coming from aviation, is NJDEP doing anything to further regulate it? Do you ever do any sort of coordination between agencies, airlines, anything to regulate what's coming from aviation?
As far as emissions emitted at the individual airports, they're just emitted like any other point or area source. But as far as the emissions from commercial airlines, to my knowledge, that's not a component of what we would regulate. And the challenge of quantifying those emissions, we recognize that we would like to look at a better way to quantify the emissions particularly from large commercial aviation. But the challenge of that too is going so beyond the scope of regulation at the state and not wanting to skew the inventory essentially of accrediting every single flight that takes off of Newark and goes around the world as part of our inventory, and then really kind of clouding the picture of the critical in-state emission drivers, which we are trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from, as part of what we've done with the Integrated Energy Plan and the Energy Master Plan and developing the Global Warming Response Act. Just don't want to lose really what we have to do as a result of planes flying around the world. But that being said, I mean, we estimate it, and we're looking for how we can get a more refined, more accurate look at it.
Hi, Jeff Tittle. I've got one question and then another point. Are you looking also at land use? Changing land patterns are a big contributor to CO2. We're losing about 15,000 acres of forested land a year in New Jersey. We're losing, farmland also. And then and then you're looking at not only the loss of cover, but then the impact of the urbanization, new buildings, new construction, and then also part of that is to look at construction materials and the impact on greenhouse gases.
So yes, Jeff, land use decisions to in an effort in carbon defense mechanisms and enhancing sequestration. Those are components that would be in the 2050 report and not really part of the greenhouse gas reporting rule.
Thank you. And then the other point I just wanted to reiterate that we do have a concern that we're not looking at life cycle and enough at fugitive emissions, and that really is concerning, as well as the 20-year horizon. So to us, we really, to me at least, and some of the other people here, we really need to do a much better job at really capturing everything. And then my final point is that given all the work that's in front of the DEP on just modeling alone and then getting into rulemaking and implementation and everything else, meanwhile there are 15 major fossil fuel infrastructure projects in the state moving forward, from the New Jersey natural gas pipeline to the New Jersey Transit power plant in the Meadowlands to Warren Glen. And I think it all shows us that if we really want this modeling to work and to be able to reduce greenhouse gases, we really do need a moratorium because we're never going to get the work done in time. And meanwhile, if those facilities all get built, we're talking about a 30% increase in CO2 and other greenhouse gases coming from those facilities. And I think it really shows us if we really care about climate urgency and if we really care about dealing with LNG exports in a terminal in Gibbstown and all the environmental impacts from that and all these other things that are happening, we really need that timeout, just like Byrne did in the Pinelands and Kane did with wetlands and Florio did with incinerators, because I think you've got a lot of good work ahead of you. I think there needs some improvements, but in order for us to get us done and have an impact, if those facilities get built, it's almost game over for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Bob, Mike Egginton, State Chamber. So as we're embarking on this effort, and I know there's several other stakeholder meetings coming up, I've said this before in individual separate meetings with what we're doing here today, to make sure that it's a complete collaborative effort with your sister agencies. I know BPU is here, but we got to make sure that DCA has an engagement in it, the Economic Development Authority for the folks that represent my sector, and ultimately anything that we always embark on in state government, the first question I get is, what's this going to cost me? And then finally, we, working again, wearing my hat on the Clean Air Council, have tried to embark on getting people out of their motor vehicles, because mobile sources still tend to be a huge problem. We've seen data on stationary sources and the improvements we've made. So the support that you could give and the solutions to Department of Transportation and to NJ Transit, and to try to support their efforts in improving the system, getting more people out of their cars, improving the transit system. That goes beyond even into areas of supporting the Portal Bridge or supporting the Gateway Tunnel project federally. It's all encompassing. So just want to make sure that as we're pointing out things that we should be looking at, we should also be coming up with collaboratives and solutions to your other sister agencies as we're trying to embark on this.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, and absolutely agree. And just to piggyback on what Paul had said before, that this stakeholdering event is not like a discrete process. This is today. This is one of what's going to be coming up. Some specific ones pertaining to the Pact mandates, but this has been an ongoing process. I mean, the Clean Air Council was instrumental in the highly warming gas, and we're incorporating much of that into the 2050 report. The integrated energy plan leading up to the final EMP, that was an exhaustive process for the last 8 months that involved, I mean, it touched all aspects of government agencies and I think industries within New Jersey, and we did that in collaboration with BPU and the other sister agencies you met. So I just want to emphasize that, we're not coming into this saying we got to learn everything now moving forward. This is an ongoing learning process that we have been engaged in, and we plan to continue.
And they may be helpful to you as they have resources and data as you're trying to put this all together. So.
Yep, absolutely. I'm going to probably call Hannah on Monday with a question.
I'm sure she's looking forward to it. Right there, Marie.
Hi, sorry, so it's saying DCA is in the room here, and I think to echo Bob's point, the past year in particular, we have been working very closely across agencies. There's always improvement in that regard. It's a sort of a vast network of different people, but we are certainly trying very hard to break down the silos and to work. And I think it is helpful also to hear on these occasions where we can be doing a better job, but we are very much in sort of regular communication.
Yeah, Rob Graff, just a couple sort of step back thoughts. I've been working on this issue for about 30 years, both on the measurement and on just sort of what you do about this. And, no matter how good an inventory is and no matter how perfectly it's executed, it's going to be missing a ton of stuff. I mean, for instance, this phone probably has a ton of greenhouse gas emissions associated with it that were probably made somewhere in China. but that fact has the same impact here as if it was emitted in New Jersey. So there's a lot of missing things. This is unlike any other issue that I would imagine that DEP works on. It's global, and so if you move emissions from one place to another, it doesn't really have any impact at all on greenhouse gas emissions. And it may be that the export of natural gas from New Jersey may prevent coal burning in the place that receives that. So there's a really complex issues. And I think we just need to, the other thing is we want to have an inventory that measures what the policies we plan to put in make. I mean, we all know we can do inventories till we're blue in the face, and I've been doing them for 15 years. And, we know we need to drive less. We know we need to use cleaner energy and use less energy. And we know we need to have policies that encourage people to live closer to work and to where they shop. And, so I think we have to, and it's important to do an inventory, but we at DVRPC have been doing this now. This is, we've done our third inventory, 2005, 2010, and 2015. And we realize it takes up a lot of resources that could be used instead to reduce some of the things that we know we need to do. And it can often be a reason to almost to defer action while you're measuring exactly what the numbers are. It's just a caution that I think we all need to keep in mind in doing this.
Okay, good comments. Go ahead, Serpa. Just press it. Thank you.
I was going to ask about your current inventory transportation. Does it include the airport ground sources, ground equipment, I should say? And is it part of it? Just a question, clarifying question. After that, I'm going to continue. Is it part of it or not?
My understanding is that the equipment used at the airport would be the same as the equipment used at an industrial site. That they would be those emissions would be captured in the industrial sector. I think there's probably some hybrid where you have short delivery equipment that's incorporated in transportation. But I think you start getting a gray area where it becomes transportation, and then it becomes in industrial emissions. But it's captured, and there's that breaking point where it's not always a clean break. It depends on what facility it is.
Thanks. And also, as everybody was trying to underline the importance, yes, and the 80% may not be reducing from everything. Maybe certain parts, certain components you can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but some other components may go a little lesser. And what I'd like to underline, especially the waste disposal practices, always has been overlooked because the contribution is 5. Even IPCC says it's 5%, 4%, 3%, so it changes. However, the research states that improved innovative technologies, not burning, not burying, other than those two approaches that they are so yesterday, unfortunately. So we have to transform our current waste disposal practices to reduce that 5% to 0, even further negate the emissions. So that may also would be really support for your next achievements, next goals, just to underline that.
Yes, thank you, Serpil. And agreed. And it's you look at the inventory and you look at the energy master plan, and it becomes apparent consistent with the governor's mandate to have 100% carbon neutral electric generation by 2050, and looking at the big driver of transportation to decarbonize transportation both through electrification and through other just sustainable people and product moving mechanisms. That's the big get. Understood that, but we are very aware that there is, whether it's waste, whether it's carbon defense or sequestration, whether there's some opportunity in highly warming gases, there is still relatively low-hanging fruit out there, and we want to identify in the 2050 report where there's opportunities for greenhouse gas reduction at a relatively low cost. They may not be in the heavy hitter sectors, but we absolutely need to take advantage of them to get the best pathway to the 80% reduction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, John. Hi, John Richmond from Blue Wave, New Jersey, and Empower, New Jersey. The schedule you've laid out basically provides for no regulation of greenhouse gases for more than 2 years. Meanwhile, we're in a climate crisis and an emergency. So I have a three-part question. Number one, what, if anything, is DEP going to be doing in the next 2 years to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Number two, have you considered any kind of emergency rulemaking so to address the crisis we're in? And number three, if you haven't considered emergency rulemaking, why not?
So I'll comment on the timeline and what we're doing. So today we're here finding out information about the mandate to do a greenhouse gas reporting rule. But that doesn't mean that even in the context of reporting greenhouse gases, we're doing it every year, and we're constantly looking for better ways to get that reporting done and refine it. So the process of both internal here and the external, the technical and scientific staff working on it, that's an ongoing process. As far as the actual discrete activities that are being done to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they are completely moving on, and you can see the mandate in the Pact, the EV bill, New Jersey's re-entering RGGI. We're going to be coming out with a strategic funding plan this spring to show where the auction revenue that is realized from RGGI will go into clean energy and clean energy or greenhouse gas reduction initiatives. So we hear you, and this is not that we're waiting for this rule process to be finished. This is an ongoing process, and there's a litany of things that are being done as we move forward.
Doug O'Malley with Environment New Jersey and with Empower New Jersey. So, Bob, your comments are taken entirely, in context, right? The governor has committed to a lot of things on climate action. Obviously, EO 100, sets out a vision to regulate carbon. I just wanted to highlight something that's not in the EO and not in the EMP, and is really critical here. There were 97 organizations that submitted a letter to the governor, the DEP commissioner, and the BPU president, just 2 days ago, urging this process, the NJPAC process, to incorporate the best available climate science from IPCC, which requires a 45% reduction in climate pollutants over the course of this decade. And obviously, what we're talking about here isn't that, but in many ways the inventory is destiny, right? So we've heard from multiple organizations or participants around the room on the need to have more accurate monitoring, whether it be atmospheric, whether it be methane, whether it be black carbon. We've heard, and I really appreciate Rob's comments on this, because he's been living with the problems of an inventory, but carbon is unique, as we all know, and so we need to be looking at the full life cycle impacts, because if we're not going to be able to hit this climate goal. And I also wanted to reiterate this: there's nothing obviously in NJPAC that references this, but it's impossible for us to ignore it. That if we move forward with the baker's dozen of fossil fuel infrastructure projects that are in front of us, we're going to be blowing a massive hole of 30% increase in carbon emissions for our state. So at that point, kind of the inventory is only a way to kind of measure of how much we're not going to be meeting climate goals or even the governor's goals. So I do think it's obviously there's been progress, but I want to reiterate the importance of having an inventory that fully captures what is being emitted and to make sure that we're using the best available climate science to make that happen. And in that vein, I wanted to kind of come back on the reporting, because Toby kind of referenced the importance of having reporting that was going to happen ideally as quickly as possible, but was going to, acknowledging that it's hard to get this up and running. The reporting ideally is mandated to be annually, but if we're getting live reporting, my question is, can we get, reporting that if it's not live, at least quarterly? Because we only have 10 years, so it does seem important that we are having at least biannual or ideally quarterly reporting to give us a sense of how much we are on track to meeting not only the broader goals from the governor, but actually the goals from the UN for IPCC climate science. So I know that's a lot there, but I wanted to kind of come back to that because there is tremendous urgency for the department to move quickly based on the climate science, and then once there's an inventory to know if we're on track to actually hit those goals.
Yeah, just so on that, I think there's probably different levels of need for frequency of reporting depending on the sector and the contaminant. So we would welcome those comments, and if there is, not an annual reporting that would be like analogous with like the emissions inventory or RGGI codes reporting or something like that, if there's something that would lend value to being more frequent, we definitely want that comment and take that into consideration in writing the rule.
Thanks, Bob. There's a couple of they're all dying. Sorry, Skype people. We're like 2 minutes shy of noon, which, my commitment is to wrap this up. Here's our really important closing remarks. The department's going to send out the slides. The slides have the questions embedded in them. So we encourage you to submit in writing your feedback, and that's the email address. And don't forget to go through the slides, and if you have responses that it could help us out with those questions that we've been asking the stakeholders, please use it. Kai's going to wrap the meeting up.
Well, thank you very much for coming out today. We really appreciate the information that you've shared with us. I do want you to understand that, yes, the process here is very open to the kind of information you provided. We want to use it to inform our rulemaking process. So to that extent, please notice that the email address up there is the best way to submit your additional feedback. And, if there's an opportunity for us to work into any kind of smaller groups on a particular issue that we have concerns with, I hope that you can identify yourself as being wanting to work in that process. So thank you very much for today. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.